Hello and welcome to the third global session of the UN Science Policy Business Forum on the Environment. My name is Pratima Singh, and I'm a senior consultant with the Economist Intelligence Unit's Public Policy and Thought Leadership team in Asia. I'm based in Singapore, and I lead the EIU's Global Food Security Index, or GFSI for short. On the third and final day of the global session, it's a great pleasure for me to be leading this discussion on nature-positive food systems for a healthy planet and healthy people. Following our discussion today, the third global session will be concluding with a final conversation on the future of multilateralism, which will explore how different sectors can work together to harness new technologies and scientific advances to solve the global issues affecting our planet. But before I get into the details of what we have planned for you today, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded and made available online after the event. There will be an opportunity to ask questions throughout the session, so please use the question function on your platform. I will introduce each speaker, but full bios are available on the session's website. This session will be a busy one and an interesting one, I'm sure, with 19 excellent speakers drawn from the government, private sector, and international organizations, all providing their own unique perspective on this topic. But with only 3 hours, I will work hard to limit each speaker to approximately 5 minutes. All right, we have a very interesting discussion and session lined up for you all today. During the course of this discussion, we'll examine 4 key questions with the aim of generating actionable insights and policy recommendations. These 4 key questions are: why a transformation of our food systems is integral for nature and economies today? How regenerative agriculture can connect us back to nature? Number 3, how do we tackle food waste? And number 4, what targeted actions can public sector players and private sector actors do to support this required transformation? With that, let's get started and dive right in. Today, the world food system really needs to be transformed urgently towards much more nature-positive patterns. The COVID-19 pandemic provided very much a wake-up call in this regard. The rebuilding of economies after this crisis offers us a unique opportunity to transform the global food system and to make it much more resilient to future shocks, while ensuring environmentally sustainable and healthy nutrition for everyone. The EIU's research on food security finds that there is an urgent need for us to feed the planet, to feed the world while also saving the planet. And the way to do this is by building strong, sustainable, and resilient food systems. As agricultural systems form the foundation of our global food system, it is imperative that they are redesigned to restore and regenerate rather than to degrade different ecosystems. All of this is required while providing affordable and healthy diets for a global population that is estimated to reach 10 billion by 2050. So quite frankly, the question is less what we need to achieve, but much more how do we achieve it? How do we induce behavioral change at scale to restore ecosystems and to reverse the damage to our planet? What policies, incentives, and investments are urgently required to motivate responsible individual and collective action, and to capitalize on the synergies that lie in our food systems? Our first session today focuses on why and how nature must regain its rightful place as the foundation and central to our food systems. To start us off, I'd like to introduce James Lomax. He's the coordinator of the Food Systems Summit and Sustainable Food Systems and Agricultural Advisor at the United Nations Environmental Programme. James, welcome to our discussion. Could you start us off by telling us a little bit about why today's food systems need to be transformed towards nature-positive patterns and how we can achieve that?
Thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure to be here. So you've actually done quite a good job, actually, by outlining the discussion. I mean, you've said that it needs to be changed, and there's a piece of work that came out last month that we did with Chatham House and Compassionate in World Farming, and if you like, it sort of frames why we have to do this, and it really gets to the nub of the issue around nature, and that is the fact that food systems impacts on biodiversity threaten 85%. So 85% of threatened species are from agriculture and food. So it's something like 24,000 of the 28,000 species at risk of extinction are being pushed that way by our food systems. That is a huge wake-up call for us. And I think it's very important we also, as you said, put it in the context of COVID-19. COVID-19 is, we've yet to see exactly, but it's thought that it's come, if you like, from the overlap of wildlife trade in intensive livestock farming, as it is a zoonotic disease. But it's also our food systems are making us more, if you like, vulnerable and less resilient to future zoonotic outbreaks too, as the way we consume, unfortunately, causes things like diabetes, obesity, which is proving, the science is starting to show us that is also decreasing, if you like, our resilience for actually withstanding these things. So food systems is everything. Food systems are about staying healthy as a people. It is about preserving nature, but critically, and this is what I think this session is going to be so good, and I'm so excited about it, is that we need to talk about how do we bring nature back into the way we produce food. And I think as somebody who used to produce commercially myself, vegetables, this is a critical point now as we become overly, if you like, dependent upon fertilizers, overly dependent upon the inputs that are available. So the trick here is, how do we do that without compromising food security? So bringing in resilience, bringing nature back so that we have a long-term future. I mean, I also think that if you farm, this is actually nature positive. We can actually give back, we can enhance our environment while at the same time making sure that we maintain livelihoods too.
Excellent, thank you very much. I really appreciate that last comment about how it's not necessarily taking away from the environment, but something that can, in fact, enhance the environment. We really need to think of agriculture and farming as something that can add value rather than deplete, going back to that point on not just restoring and definitely not degrading, but really, I guess, regenerating. Thank you very much, James. Very, very insightful opening remarks.
I do have a quick point though, because the Food Systems Summit this year, and it's 2021, and I'm sure you know all about this, of course. This is an incredible opportunity that we have. You know, for years we've been sort of trying to connect consumption to production. Governments were thinking about it, but not quite sure. Private sector was struggling. This is our opportunity. 2021 is the year where suddenly this idea of food systems that are good for people, planet, and of course the farmers, this is now coming up. So this is an incredible opportunity. There are national dialogues in many countries for the summit. So this is an ideal opportunity, if you like, for us to lean in and really turn the corner towards action and systemic action at the country level. So very exciting. This is the year. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, James. Completely agree. 2021 is, it's not the start of the new decade, but definitely a critical year in this conversation. All right, thank you for those remarks. I wanted to turn over and maybe chat to Philip Limbury now. Philip is the CEO of the leading international farm animal welfare organization, Compassion in World Farming. James also mentioned how livestock and I guess zoonotic diseases are now at the heart of it. But obviously we've had a lot of attention on livestock farming and how that feeds into nature positive food systems. So Philip, maybe I'll ask you, from a policy perspective, what is the required policy action that's needed to achieve nature positive food systems? And in particular, what about subsidies?
Fatima, great to see you, and thank you so much for having me here. And I think to begin to answer your question, for millennia now, farming has worked in harmony with nature. However, one human lifetime ago, things really changed dramatically. Farming became dominated by industrial agriculture, and that was something which was encouraged and supported through subsidies and government policy. Farm animals became separated from the land. They were put into darkened sheds where they were caged, crammed and confined. Crops started to be grown in monocultures using artificial fertilizers and the overuse of chemical pesticides. And essentially the boil down was nature was swept away. Half a century on, we're now starting to realize how that shift has had serious unintended consequences and how the future really depends on us making peace with nature. Industrial agriculture is a major driver of wildlife declines, something which James Lomax outlined very, very clearly. It's a major driver of deforestation, of soil degradation. It's also the biggest cause of animal cruelty on the planet. It's also being recognized as a serious pandemic risk. Keeping animals in factory farms creates the perfect breeding ground for new and dangerous strains of disease. And far from sparing land for nature, the reality is that intensive farming, industrial agriculture, continues to expand and is encroaching on the world's last remaining wild lands. Putting it simply, the idea of sustainable intensification is a myth. The reason for that is that vast acreages of precious land, of arable land, have to be devoted to grow feed for confined animals. It looks like a space-saving idea, but it actually isn't, because globally 40% of our entire grain harvest is fed to industrially reared animals. If you want to put that in human terms, if we fed that grain directly to people, it could sustain an extra 4 billion of us. Yet, as animal feed, much of the food value in calories and protein is lost. How to change is increasingly seen as reconnecting food production and nature through regenerative agroecological farming. Combined with more balanced diets, we need both the production and the consumption side to come back into sync. Eating more plants and less and better meat from nature-friendly farms, where as sentient beings, farmed animals can move freely and experience the joy of life. Where they can be mixed with rotational crops grown using natural predators and disease control instead of chemicals and drugs. But the big question, coming back to your question, Pratima, is how do we get there and fast? And the answer there lies in all of us playing a part. Business, finance, governments, the UN, and civil society. The answer lies in food companies setting measurable targets for the reduction of livestock products, shunning those from the factory farm altogether, and diversifying protein offerings into plant-based or fermentation and cellular meat alternatives. It lies in the financial sector, ensuring that agricultural funding is only available to support nature-positive practices. It lies in governments creating policy environments for change, using directives, incentives, and subsidies that steer food and farming to this new nature-friendly era. And the opportunities are enormous. If we take subsidies, globally, governments provide $700 billion worth of subsidy, farm subsidy, every year. That's more than $1 million every minute. Most of that at the moment currently drives the climate crisis and destruction of more wildlife. That money could be far better spent redirecting it towards regenerative farming and reducing demand for meat. Using a tax system, for example, taxes could be levied on factory farmed meat. Tax revenue then used to offset the cost of healthy, sustainable foods, making them more affordable for all, making sure that no one is left behind. And we have to really focus on the fact that greening food production in this way and managing demand for meat are going to be crucial for meeting the UN's Sustainable Development Goals agenda. We therefore need an overarching narrative, a UN global agreement on food, one that recognizes food's central role in the success of existing conventions such as climate and biodiversity. In short, we need to seize the moment to build back better, using this year's UN Food Systems Summit to move toward a global agreement to end factory farming, to reset our food system, toward farming with nature, not against us, not against her, and to do that for all our stakes for millennia to come. Pratima, thank you for having me here.
Thanks very much, Philip. That was hugely insightful. I think you hit a couple of points that I kind of want to reiterate just as we sum up. Your point on having sustainable diets. We have another conversation coming up as we go through this section on what exactly is a sustainable diet and how do we mainstream it. I think that's hugely important because as consumers, it's critical for us to now also ask those questions to really make sure some of these policy changes are easy to make. One of the questions I was going to ask you, and I do want to be cognizant of time though, is when we talk about it, it seems very obvious what the solution is, right? We need to redirect our subsidies. We need to be able to incentivize more sustainable agricultural practices. However, there's always a bit of friction or we're not being able to get there as urgently and quickly as we need to. And I think just generally we talk about sustainable consumption, sustainable production, and of course, why and how we can get there quicker. So thank you very much, Philip. That was hugely interesting. I do want to also move on and talk a little bit to Dr. Tarifa El-Sawi, who's with us here today. She's the Deputy Director General at the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, and she's here with us to talk about the biophysical constraints for agriculture. So, Dr. Tarifa, thank you for joining us. You've obviously heard our conversation so far on nature-positive food systems, on driving more sustainable agricultural practices. Can we talk a little bit about the biophysical constraints for sustainable agriculture today, and specifically, how can we overcome them?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And yes, absolutely. With COVID-19 and with this pandemic, it showed us how our food system are quite fragile, especially for those areas which are marginal environments, and this is what we refer to them. These areas where they suffer from biophysical constraint as well as also social constraint. The International Center for Biosaline Agriculture has been working for over 20 years now on finding innovative solutions for those areas. So what about and what is special about these areas? Soil is quite poor for agriculture. High climate change, the impact is really seen and noticeable. Drought seasons, which is quite high, as well as they do have the water scarcity, as well as the water salinity. So given that we have all those challenges in these areas, what can we do? Again, the impact on the farmers, it's quite high. And the access of resources as well is very high. 21% of all land resources are marginal. And this has really put a lot of, I would say, responsibility on our shoulder, where we think of solutions that are outside the box. So we are not encouraging, or we're not trying to focus on using the fresh water for solutions for agriculture. So we are at the center looking at alternative solution, which is using the unconventional sources of water. How can we really employ and use and utilize saline water for agriculture? How can we really look at the brine and brackish water, the rejected water from desalination, in order to use it as an alternative water resource? And again, what are these crops that can grow in such environment using this kind of water? So first, we try to find the alternative resources of water, and we have identified a number of crops, holophytic plants, such as Saliconia, nutritious, and yet it is saline loving. We are talking about Saliconia, we are talking about amaranth, these type of crops that are more sustainable to thrive and be produced in saline environment and saline agriculture. So the crops diversity becomes next, because this is really make us shy away from the normal crops that cannot be sustainable in such agriculture. So therefore, working with farmers are quite important, and raising the awareness for them to adopt these type of crops in order to ensure that we do have a sustainable crops for them. The third point, which is very important, is really looking at the employment of technology. Data-driven agriculture is the future. Again, our motto in ICBA is agriculture for tomorrow. So we cannot really think of tomorrow without really ensuring that we are talking about genomics, we are talking about artificial intelligence. How can we really employ drones? How can we really have all the technologies enabling and digital farming, for example, taking place? This is really going to help the future generation to be embedded as well in the efforts of sustainable agriculture, as well as to ensure that we have I would say, resources efficient ways of sustaining agriculture for the growing population that we are facing, and looking at those challenges available in marginal environments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarifa. That was very interesting and important. I think that forward-looking approach on what are some of those crops that we can grow in these environments, what is the more sustainable way of, I guess, thinking about farming for the future. And I think you hit a very critical note here on being able to work with farmers on doing things like this. So obviously educating farmers on using technology, and also, of course, I think at the end of the day, farmers know their land the best. And so there is a very important angle here of involving them in this dialogue on thinking about how we can innovate together to be able to create something that is much more sustainable and long-term, that benefits us all, including the planet. So thank you, Dr. Tarifa. Very nice to hear from you. I wanted to move and onwards to ask our last speaker for this particular session on nature-positive food systems, Elsbeta Klein. Elsbeta is the Director General of the International Fertilizer Association. We've spoken a lot about sustainable agriculture, food systems, innovation, managing scarce resources like water. I do also want to get her perspective from the International Fertilizer Association. Elsbeta, a very important question for you. It's kind of loaded, but maybe we ask you to spend the next 5 minutes talking about it. But is agriculture a perpetrator, or is it a victim when it comes to this conversation on sustainability? I know that, as I said, it's a long question. It's a very involved question. But if you could give us a sense in the next 5 minutes of the role of the agricultural industry in achieving this sustainable food system that we've highlighted, that's critical.
Thank you, Pratima. Great to see you, great to work with you, and thank you to the UN for the invite. So in the world, as in nature, there is rarely a single response. There is rarely a single answer to a question. And when we think about agriculture, it is complex and it plays a role in everything we do every single day. There is hardly a day when all of us don't touch something that was produced by the agri sector through facilitating nature. And as a couple of speakers ahead of me mentioned, we still have about 2 billion people today who do not have regular access to safe and nutritious and sufficient food, and many cannot afford the cheapest healthy diet. But we also know that that desire for food security needs to be balanced with two other variables. And those variables are farmers' income, farmers' livelihoods, making sure that those that work the land can make a living. And the last one is environmental sustainability, making sure that we don't take out more than we give. That is critical. Agriculture and its value chains are victims of the environmental impacts around us. And you are right, they are also a contributor to them. So how do we solve that? I'm going to go to your first question. You ask us about the how. So how do we go about it? How do we take it forward? Nature is at the center of the global food system, and we need three things to make sure that it's going to remain there. First, we need governments who provide good regulatory environment, who provide level playing field, who provide incentives for the outcomes that they desire. I think Philip ahead of me was talking about that. We need to have incentives to get the outcomes we wish for. And the second thing, we have industry, and industry has a large role to play. And last but not least, we have to have finance to make it all happen. Fertilizer industry that I represent has two avenues to move the needle. One, through the industrial production and making it as sustainable as current science and technology allow us to happen. And the second one is working with farmers to ensure that farmers are incentivized to not only through the price that they receive for their crops, but also through the comprehensive outcomes, including soil health. Again, what we incentivize is going to happen, and we need to incentivize the outcomes that we wish to have. When it comes to industry, I have to say that a lot has changed in the past few years, maybe in the last couple of years. Social and environmental sustainability is now as important as the company's market share and the shareholder value. New business models integrating sustainability are at the core of the agriculture value chains. And the more the company can demonstrate its purpose and its sustainable path, the better outcomes it has in the shareholder value, in the long-term profits for the shareholders, but also it will create new business opportunities. We also know that investing in communities, whether it's farmer communities or other communities, and protecting the environment brings in a whole lot of benefits. It brings better costs, lower costs, higher productivity, and most importantly, it brings license to operate. Sustainability is certainly a central consideration in the fertilizer industry today. I joined this association 5 weeks ago, and there was not a single conversation where we didn't talk about sustainability. The industry is working hard to feed the people and improve livelihoods of the farmers while protecting the planet. So let's talk briefly about the third requirement, that we need to put the nature back in the middle of the food system, and that is finance. The financial industry started more than a decade ago with an innovation that they brought to us, which is green bonds. And since then, we are seeing about $200 billion invested every single year in green bonds. And a couple of years ago, financial industry brought another innovation, green loans and sustainability loans. Now, are they a panacea? No, they are not a panacea, but they surely incentivize companies to do the right thing. We go back to the topic, to the key thing here, which is incentives. Incentivize what you wish for, and you're going to get there. I'm proud to say that a number of companies in the agriculture value chain have obtained green and sustainable loans or are working to obtain those. And because we are doing this event virtually, I do have to mention the COVID and post-COVID world. And we need to think through how we come out on the other end while making sure that the nature is in the middle of the food systems. So I'd like to here mention the study which was recently published by the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, which indicates that agri-sector creates most jobs per dollar invested. So we have an opportunity in the food system, in the agri-value chain, to come out on the other side, not only respecting the nature, but also provide jobs that we all need in a post-COVID world. So in closing, Pratima, I'd like to mention that the global economy must be made more resilient, and we must make it more sustainable. What does it look like for the agri-value chain? We would grow food more efficiently, we produce less emissions, we capture carbon, and we provide growing population with all the nutrients that they need. All this while improving living standards. So this is where we need to end up. And I'm gonna go back to my key theme of my 5 minutes, which is incentives. If we incentivize what we want to achieve, we are all collectively going to get there. Thank you very much, Pratima. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Elzbieta. That was very inspiring and optimistic, quite frankly. I think highlighting where we're ending up, and it leaves me with a sense of optimism that we're already making progress on how to get there. I think that that's what's quite critical at this point. The way you started really struck a chord with me, which was around the importance of farmers in this conversation, the importance of finance, and of course the incentives that tie everything together. But one of the things we know while doing the work on food security here at the EIU is the irony of the situation is that smallholder farmers and farmers tend to be the most food insecure people on the planet. And really by targeting these groups, you're encouraging them to obviously produce food and feed the planet and the world, but also do it in a sustainable way. And so I completely agree with your point there, which is green financing, green initiatives and loans to make the world much more sustainable, starting from the bottom up and the ground up. So thank you very much, Elzbieta. Very nice speaking with you. All right, before we close this session, I feel like it's been a very interesting conversation talking about nature-positive food systems. I do want to ask a question. We've had some interesting questions coming from the audience, so thank you for that. But one of the questions is, how do we shorten our food chain to save the planet and feed the 9 billion people in the world by 2050? And are we really prepared to do this? So maybe I'll ask our first speaker, James, to give us a sense of whether we can do this, shorten our food chain to serve the planet, and how prepared we are to do this. James, maybe if you could summarize for us in about a minute, let's say. It's a big topic, but I'll give you a minute to answer.
Thank you so much. Well, actually, everything that's been spoken about is spot on. What I'm so excited about this whole thing, Pratima, and this dialogue and this narrative is that issues like reducing supply chains and value chains, making them shorter. I think this is now on the table. I think many years ago it wasn't. Not even many years ago. I think we're talking 3 or 4 years ago. This issue of food systems change. How can we, if you like, kind of get to a point where we recognize that very complex food systems are possibly not good for farmers, are possibly not good for people, and especially during COVID's time, we've seen that very complex supply chains can also be broken too. So how do we bring that a connection much more between producers and the consumers, I think, are key. But we have to see here that everything is on the table now, right? We're in a position now where everything is on the table. We have to be inclusive in how we do it. Everybody has to be around the table. We have to have those difficult conversations around how we farm, around what we consume, around the role that finance have and could have. And I think there are some good changes, but we've also got to recognize that a lot of the negative things have also been financed by the finance industry. So everything is on the table. Let's have those difficult conversations and let's get cracking and get context specific solutions being taken on board at the national level. And I think if we do that, and then I think we are, if you like, we can get to a tipping point. Thank you.
Absolutely. Completely agree. I think it really starts with a dialogue and a conversation. We need to have that open and honest conversation, get everyone involved, all the individual stakeholders, to really drive action across different levels and policy actions. So thanks very much, James. I'm going to now move on to our second session today. We are going to talk a little bit about pollution prevention. So essentially, our focus will be on pollution prevention and management, diving deeper into nutrient use efficiency. Maybe I'll set the context before I ask our speakers to comment. But the world today needs nutrients. These are really essential to raising crops and animals and to feed an increasing world population. This growing human population and per capita meat and dairy consumption and requirements are causing a rapid increase in nutrient consumption, especially of nitrogen. Losses of nitrogen, however, are in fact polluting the planet while representing a huge waste of resources worth about 200 billion annually. It's anticipated that developing countries may account for 3/4 of the global nutrient consumption by 2050, and that's contributing to continued global increase of pollution unless we take action today. So with that context, I wanted to, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker for this session on nutrient pollution, His Excellency Mahindananda Ayuthkamge, who is the Minister of Agriculture of Sri Lanka. Minister, welcome and thank you for joining us. The question that I have for you is that the UNEA-4 resolution of sustainable nitrogen management was the first resolution that was related to nutrient management in the history of the United Nations. It's obviously agreed that by the nations, by different countries worldwide, and it was successfully adopted just a few years ago in 2019. This resolution provides a framework and overarching policy guidance for the UN, as well as for its member states. And it's not mandatory, but even if it's not a mandatory commitment for governments, tell us why the Sri Lankan government embraced this nutrient challenge and led the Colombo Declaration with the UN.
Thank you, Pratima. UNEA-4 resolution on sustainable nitrogen management was the first ever resolution related to nutrient management in the history of the United Nations. It was agreed by the nations worldwide and successfully adopted in 2019. The resolution provides an overreaching policy guidance for UN as well as its member states. Even if it is not a mandatory commitment, governments, Sri Lanka embraced the nutrient challenge and led the Colombo Declaration with the United Nations. It is indeed challenging the embrace a scenario which is beyond your control. Environment has no boundaries. What we add here as nutrients in my country may impact the health of the community somewhere else in the world. We will never know what exactly nature is up to unless we turn ourselves to understand its rhythm. However, when we were voted by a nation to serve them, no matter how different it may be, we must make sure that we are at our best capacity, ready to embrace any challenges. Though we know from practical application that nearly 80% synthetic nutrient we add the artificial fertilizer are being end up as pollution. One should have a real bravery to put it on table. particularly as a United Nations resolution. So let me not forget to thank the Government of India and the UNEP-SPBF project, International Nutrition Management System, funded by UK and kept the nutrition resolution. You are never alone to make a difference. As soon as we were convinced the opportunity to review our national policies, the guidance we got from the nutrition resolutions, we thought, why should not we act fast? As much as nutrition is everywhere, the related issues are everywhere too, yet unavailable to everyone. We politicians are exception. So we thought, why not we speak to the other nations? They must be having more or less similar issues. The idea convinced us to speak to United Nations back in 2019. And here in 2021, we have something called Colombo Declaration for us to work on individually as well as jointly on nutrition management. Colombo Declaration is an ambition set by a group of nations. So I believe United Nations has a critical role to play. Campaigning on nutrition to raise awareness around the world. Last year and year 2021 are remarkable. As you know, it was the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. COVID-19 pandemic gave us space to release even after 75 years or perhaps beyond that. Should we be doing the same thing? Don't we need to revisit our mandates? I see that having massively fragmented the issues we face, we are stagnated, struggling to find solutions. Same applies to agriculture, food system, nutrition. On international scale, on nation scale, and integrability on farmer scale as well. In the name of development, we fragment almost anything to everything. Just imagine a farmer system where balance and harmony are the passion. Visualize a world where our diet, our food system, how we manage that we had as agricultural impact. Our post-harvest and the agriculture economic strategies in balance and harmony with nature. Perhaps we must want to realize the nutrition resolutions and the Colombo Declaration at the UN Food System Summit, inviting countries to revisit the agriculture strategies, from environment investments to farmers' incentives, that we eat, how we eat, our food travel, how healthy we are, and how happy are those who produce to matters. So I believe we need to address these on farmer scale, on national scale, as well as international scale simultaneously. It doesn't matter which country is on the lead. What matters to me is that how well I contribute today for a better tomorrow for the world. You become a leader, not be staying behind, but be being able to think on everyone ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I echo that sentiment on it doesn't matter who's leading as long as we're cooperating to get the outcomes that we now so desperately need, not just for our individual countries, but for the planet as a whole. So thank you very much for sharing the experience of Sri Lanka and for taking the time to speak with us. All right, let's talk a little bit more about this issue. And to be able to sort of dive deeper into it, let's ask Professor Mark Sutton, a little bit about the past before we look to the future and look ahead at what else needs to be done. Professor Mark Sutton is an environmental physicist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Professor Sutton, why has there been so little action on nitrogen in the past that we're only talking about the UNEA, the United Nations Environmental Assembly, ratifying everything in 2019? So why has there been such little action previously? And looking ahead, what are the future steps after the Colombo Declaration?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I think the first thing to say is thanks so much for the Minister for taking action, for Sri Lanka being there in the lead with the Colombo Declaration. It's really making a difference to have champion countries like India, Sri Lanka out there in the lead. So why really have we forgotten nitrogen? And I think it's this one word, fragmented. The crazy thing is that everybody's heard about carbon. Why are we not talking about nitrogen? It's bizarre. We've tripled the flows of nitrogen on the planet. That's a huge difference. And it's because of this fragmentation. We say that nitrogen is everywhere and invisible. So think about it. It's in the water courses, it's in air pollution, it's in the greenhouse gases causing climate change, threatening biodiversity, threatening the stratospheric ozone layer. We've got rid of our CFCs largely. Now it's nitrous oxide and nitrogen gas that's compromising the stratospheric ozone layer. So with that fragmentation, it means everybody's had part of the puzzle and nobody's had whole of the puzzle. And of course, that fragmentation means no action. So how are we addressing that? And we're really aiming to bring that together to recognize that if we work joining up across the nitrogen cycle, that's where the successes will lie. And the first thing we recognize is, and you said it right at the beginning, is that the global nitrogen waste, that's all the nitrogen that's lost to the environment, if you add that up as a street value of a fertilizer equivalent, it's something like $200 billion worth of resource wasted. That's a really crazy thing for us to be doing. In the Colombo Declaration, one of the great lines there is an ambition to work towards halving nitrogen waste, to save globally $100 billion a year. So that's a great plan. You can see how it fits straight in to post-COVID green recovery. It means let's do things good for the economy, let's do things good for the environment, for people at the same time. So I want to just tell you a few things about how we're moving forward with this. And I think first off, I just tell you about a report we've just published with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe through their task force on reactive nitrogen, and that was adopted in December. It's a guidance document on integrated sustainable nitrogen management in agriculture, 74 different options, 20 different principles, all the things you might do, a great recipe book of options. Just picking out one of those, one of my favorites is manure management. When you've got your manure, don't just put it in the field where it's going to leak into the ground and get water pollution. Don't just put it on a concrete pad to stop it leaking to the river, but put it entirely in a box. So it's not going into the air and it's not going to the water. If you can smell your manure, you're losing it to the environment. We don't want that. We want it in the soil carefully. So there's a whole range of measures there. And I think the second thing to say is, when reducing your nitrogen losses, we're going to have to save money. That seems crazy. Why is that? Because if you reduce your nitrogen losses, you've got more or less in the system, more available in the soil. It means you don't need to put so much in. If you do put so much in and you don't for the losses, it's just going to squeeze out and create pollution somewhere else. So to get the win-wins, we have to reduce that waste and of course the opportunity for the financial saving. So just to finish off then, I'm going to tell you a couple of things about where to next. And of course, 2021 is a really exciting year with the Food Systems Summit coming up, with a COP26 for climate in Glasgow in November in the UK, my country. And I'm speaking to you from Scotland, just an hour down the road from Glasgow. First off, on the Food Systems Summit, we're going to be working on a report. We're working to finalize it. It's called Appetite for Change. It's by our expert panel on nitrogen and food. It's following up our report called Nitrogen on the Table. We'll be launching that in the summer, and it's going to tell you how we can link food choices to nitrogen pollution altogether. And the second is, as we work up towards COP26, we're already working in partnership with the Sri Lankan government through the British UK government, looking towards regional, ultimately global events in preparation for the climate summit on how can nitrogen management become part of the conversation on climate. It's not just carbon going forward, it's got to be carbon and nitrogen working together.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think it's very interesting, and you're absolutely right. Carbon gets a lot of attention now, and we really need to be able to bring the conversation on nitrogen into this conversation on climate, and really be able to, I guess, recommend urgent action on this front as well. Your points around the fact that fragmentation was one of the reasons this is becoming challenging, but then also very clearly highlighting how governments like Sri Lanka, the UK are coming together to be able to also highlight the importance of this issue and make it much more of a sustainable sort of solution going forward. So appreciate you taking the time. Looking forward to hearing more during the UN Food Summit and of course COP26 in November as well. So thanks very much, Professor. All right. The last speaker in our focus on pollution and nutrient pollution in particular is Ms. Maliha Malik. She is joining us from Pakistan. She is our Chief Operating Officer of 4G Fertilizer Company's Food Security and Agricultural Center for Excellence, or FACE in short, I think. Ms. Maliha is going to provide us the industry perspective in this conversation. We've heard from academics and policymakers and others, but Ms. Malik, could you maybe tell us a little bit about your perspective from the industry on what's the best way to achieve nutrient use efficiency, and specifically on some policy actions that are required to support this outcome?
Thank you very much, Pratima. As an industry representative, I take this opportunity to reflect upon the programs run by 4G Fertilizer Company, Pakistan, as its paths in attaining Vision 2030 through implementing SDGs. FFC capacity building, technical assistance and training to farmers program initiated in 1982 as an initiative beyond the call of business has reached 2.2 million farmers. However, in view of the grave situation faced all over and the renewed challenges emerging from climate change, FFC initiated its milestone program called Food Security and Agriculture Center of Excellence in 2019. FACE embeds global best farming practices, step-by-step supervision, and support financial empowerment and social welfare services to rural farmers under one roof to ensure nitrogen management and social welfare services to rural farmers under one roof to ensure that FACE employs top-line precision farming technologies, which has been made accessible to the farmers in Pakistan for the first time. It's a very unique program. The initiation of first hexacopter fleet for precision farming, mapping, monitoring, and data analysis and vision to save millions of hectares from overspraying or excessive use of agri inputs like over-fertilization and over-pesticide sprays. Similarly, FACE extends quality and certified inputs to farmers, which ensure that the soil and crop are saved from harmful effects and degradation. In addition, our low-cost loans ensure that the farmers have access to new technology that increase efficiency and effectiveness. Other programs include best livestock practices, dairy processing and management programs for women, multifaceted programs, including kitchen gardening, poultry, are being run to ensure they are made successful segments of the society. We ensure that the program will not only serve Pakistan, but act as a model for other developing countries in future. We actually want to support farmer, not just in agriculture, but overall his social welfare as well. So when the farmer is actually registered with our program, we provide him from soil preparation till the disposal of the crop. We are actually supervising him. That way, he's not, there's a proper crop plan is prepared on the scientific results, on the scientific methods, and not just on traditional farming. Most of the soil are degraded in Pakistan. So really, we cannot grow enough food without fertilizer. I mean, that's like not humanly possible anymore. I think that's the case with most of the world. And that's why like we are not even achieving our food security goals. I mean, as per the United Nations 2030 goal agenda, we are on the 20% of out of 35%. I mean, this is what they planned, that we should be doing 35% production growth, but we are on the 20%, and that clearly shows that we are not going to achieve our goals the way we are working now. So this is our solution in Pakistan, because most of the farmers are not educated enough. So for them, it's not just the training part of it, because once you train them, you really need to then provide him with all the quality inputs as well. And if you provide him quality inputs, he doesn't have enough finances to buy those. So not just a provision of the inputs, but provision to buy those inputs. And then at the same time, at what time he should be spraying and at what time he needs to fertilize and how much he needs to fertilize. So our representative, the FACE officers and our agriculturists and R&D officers, they all keep them in strict supervision so that, you know, these pesticide sprays and all, they are done as they are supposed to be. So that's one way of keeping the nitrogen footprint in control and reduce the over fertilization and pesticides, and, you know, save the environment as well.
Thank you very much, Maliha. That's hugely helpful and great context. I always really enjoy hearing examples of how successfully you've managed to implement some of these changes on the ground. It really provides hope on how we can kind of make some of these changes bottom up. And I think your point on land degradation, I think it's important to highlight. I think while we were doing our study on GFSI, we also note that more than a third of soil today is already moderately to severely degraded. And there are estimates by the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, that this number is likely to reach almost 60% in the next few decades, highlighting the urgency of managing soil effectively going forward. So really appreciate you sharing that the best practice there and the initiative that you've been running from FACE. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. That brings us at this point to the, I guess, close of our second session. However, we do have some questions from the audience. So thank you everyone for sending in your questions and your thoughts. I'd love to be able to direct these to our panelists. One of the questions, and I think this is to Professor Mark Sutton, how can the nitrogen dialogue be used to catalyze a paradigm shift in the world food production post-COVID? Essentially, how do we link the post-COVID world, the dialogue there, to the dialogue that we were talking about around bringing nitrogen to the center of this discussion as well?
Yes, thank you very much. I think what is clear is that we're going to be in challenging times in the years ahead. If 2008 was tough, what's this going to be like in the next 10 years? You're the economist, you can tell us. It means that COVID is going to be part of every conversation. It's going to be part of every international agreement. And one of the things we're doing on the nitrogen world is working to get the international agreements together. So we're supported by the Global Environment Facility and UNEP on the International Nitrogen Management System. And we're moving to an interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism. That means the Climate Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, the Air Convention, the Water Convention, all starting to work together. And of course, with a common goal to save $100 billion that's good for the environment. So clearly this fits perfectly within our post-COVID world. And I think it's going to have to be at the heart of our conversations.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think you're right that there's no choice, but we are going to have this conversation. Maybe a difficult one, but it's an important one that we can no longer ignore. Thank you very much, Professor. All right, let's move on to the third session for our panel today. I want to set the stage for our conversation on sustainable consumption and urban food systems. So essentially, I think we've had some very interesting and important conversations so far, and this is really in keeping with that. It's a critical session that really demonstrates how each one of us can do our part to address this issue on sustainable consumption, given that we're all consumers, and also our drive to more sustainable urban food systems. I'll open with a couple of statistics that I thought were really powerful and drive the message home. 1/3 of all our food today is lost or wasted. And this is in spite of over 690 million people and quite frankly, rising number of people going hungry. I find that this is one of the more interesting ironies in the world today as well, that some countries and some places, due to inefficiencies in storage, transportation, and then also our own consumption patterns, there's a lot of food waste, while at the same time we have more and more hungry people and more and rising food insecurity. Despite a 300% increase in global food production, and this is since the mid-1960s, we're also seeing hidden hunger, malnutrition, which is malnutrition is lack of micronutrients and just undernutrition generally in all its forms, is now the #1 factor that's contributing to the global burden of disease. It's reducing life expectancy as well. So the types of diseases that we're dealing with is evolving, and one of the causes of that is also the lack of nutrition in our food systems. And then on the other hand, we also have over 2 billion people that are overweight or obese. So really two different sides of the spectrum. The Economist Intelligence Unit's research on food security has found that solving the problem of food loss and food waste also aids in achieving our global food security outcomes and goals, with food being redirected to more efficient, places where it's needed the most. Reducing the current rate of food loss and waste by about 50% by the year 2050 would close this gap between the food needed in 2050 and the food available in 2010 by more than 20%. So there is a lot of gains here. It would avoid the need to convert that is more than the current energy and industry related emissions of Japan. So really highlighting that food waste can help us achieve some of the goals that we've been talking about for a while now. At the same time, we see that about 80% of all the food that is expected to be consumed by 2050 will be happening in cities. So urban areas are actually at a very interesting point where they're at a unique, intersection of being able to actually spark a transformation towards circular economy for food, where it can be produced and where it can be consumed as well. So I'll stop talking about the context and maybe turn over to one of our speakers to set the stage for this conversation and to help us get started on this dialogue. I'd like to invite Martina Otto, who's the head of cities at the United Nations Environmental Program. Martina, welcome to this conversation. I'd like to start by asking you, given your experience and expertise on this topic, could you tell us a little bit about what targeted actions public and private sector stakeholders can undertake and are required to undertake to support the transformation towards more sustainable consumption and healthy diets? And I guess I have a second question, which maybe I'll follow up with, but I'll just let you answer both of them together maybe in the next 5 minutes, which is, can you also tell us why urban farming offers a unique opportunity to spark this transformation towards a more circular economy for food?
Thanks very much, Pratima, and thanks for having set the stage so well with giving us really all the good reasons why we need to look into this issue. And let me just re-emphasize, because there was a first session already earlier that really looked at the production side of things. Now we have a session that looks at the consumption side of things. And that is a side that has been overlooked for way too long. I have to say, and you brought out all the good numbers. I mean, we've been increasing food production, but we still have huge issues in terms of malnutrition, but also with regard to people going hungry. So there is something that we need to do on the consumption side as well. But having said that, I really want to emphasize how important it is that we take a systems perspective. So all the policies need to take into account the issues from pre to post-production activities, so from farm to fork. Well, but then a little more into going into the policy side of things. Countries need to add diets and food loss and waste into their national climate plans. This can improve their contributions to climate mitigation and adaptation from food systems by as much as 25%. So that's huge. But for the time being, I mean, if you look at the existing nationally determined contributions that were submitted in the last round, to the UNFCCC Secretariat, only 11 countries included food loss in the 2015 NDCs, and none actually included food waste. So there is really something to recognize it as a climate measure as much as a health and social measure indeed. There is a need to support the shift in diets to healthier diets that come with less environmental impacts. And I think it's really important, again, that we look at this connection, the sweet spot, where it's good for people and the planet. So transitioning to more plant-based diets. And you gave us the numbers why that makes sense from a health perspective. Now, on the food waste side, it's really important to take this target, measure, act approach to reducing the current rate of food loss and waste by 50% by 2050, and that's in line with the SDG 12.3. And here, well, we've seen that this is a good framework for action. We have a couple of examples of countries and companies that have taken action based on this, and that meeting this target is actually doable. And we will hear a bit later in the session from Unilever and the city of Bogota how to implement this approach. But here, measurement is really a critical step to making the case for action and prioritization. And UNEP is issuing a new food waste index report developed together with RAP, also on this panel, to help exactly with that, presenting the most comprehensive food waste data collection to help make the case, but also doing some modeling for those who are not having all the capacity yet to do the in-depth measuring, and also offering a methodology to actually really do this. And we will provide some help here with regional working groups to build the capacities on that. So measure, target, measure, act is a really important one, but also to help develop national strategy on food loss and waste through multi-stakeholder processes, to support voluntary agreements with the private sector. So that's the second point that is really important, this co-creation together with the private sector. I want to highlight maybe as well the importance of something that we haven't yet touched upon, and that's the uptake of cooling and cold chain technologies, where policies can really help as well. And obviously, the cold chain we usually look at as a measure to avoid loss, but there's also something in it where, particularly in developing countries, the cold chain is not maintained until even the household level. So there is an area here. And then maybe as well looking into the health and safety regulations to help actually divert the food that would otherwise be wasted and thrown away, but to actually divert that still for food donations. Obviously, they need to be safe, but that's an area as well. And since we were talking about behavior, it's really about creating the nudges to shift norms and practices. And here explore maybe as well the development of a separate collection of food waste and pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-throw systems. So that's maybe in a nutshell something on the policy side to address food waste. And you already alluded to well, the urban farming and the opportunities here. And I think one area where there's a real connect between the two items is that the more we go urban, the more we lose connection with where the food comes from. It's a bit like with electricity, we think it comes from the socket and don't necessarily think about all the production behind it. So reconnecting the urbanites with the food system is one possibility that can come through urban and peri-urban farming, and that is on the one side with maybe more farmers markets, so cities providing the space for that, and we have seen in times of COVID that has happened to mend some of the broken supply chains as well. And but also cities making space for community projects where they can actually farm, particularly in poorer neighborhoods, so that they have access to healthier diets at a lower price. There are really interesting projects as well with regard to edible schoolyards, and that is actually from a very early age on to learn more about good food practices in a sense. But urban farming is also a way to bring nature back into the city and to rebalance urban and peri-urban relationships, to help manage pressure on resources such as land and water. And here maybe as an example that comes to mind is watersheds. They don't stop at city boundaries, and obviously the water that is used in peri-urban agriculture, and at the same time we need water in cities and facing water scarcities. The more we look at this as a system, the more we find solutions that work for the different communities as well. And obviously there's a nice link to this first session with the regenerative agriculture as well. And the last point in terms of benefits of urban farming that I'd like to make is that it is a means of promoting circularity. And we heard already about the nutrient cycles, and food and other organic waste can be composted and then be put to use in urban farming projects. But there's also something about using heat. It's about the water again. How do you collect water, rainwater, for example, rainwater harvesting, and thereby managing some of the heavy rains that are coming and turning that really into a cycle. And it is really on the rise, urban farming. We do see quite a bit of interest and really across board all over the globe. And obviously it takes very different forms, from traditional farming to very innovative forms of vertical and indoor farming as well. And it comes with these different business models, from very professional, larger scale, to some startups, and to community-based. And I think you'll hear quite a bit of that later as well. But really it is a way of shortening value chains and thereby reducing as well some of the impacts that come with transport and packaging while creating local jobs. And I think that's really something maybe to end on, that it is a means of creating local jobs as well.
Thanks very much, Martina. And I guess one more thing I'll add, it's to startups and more professional companies, but also to some of us trying to grow things in our backyard.
Exactly, you're absolutely right. I talked about the community-based, but indeed it's each of us. Indeed, you don't need to have all your neighbors participating. sometimes your, your window board suffices as well as a start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think there's something that you mentioned around if we think about it as a systems-based approach, we can see the solutions. And I think that's really critical in all of our conversations. The solutions become much clearer when we don't look at it in isolation. We don't think about, I guess, even stakeholders in isolation. So thank you very much for that. I want to now share a message from His Excellency, Mr. Renato Alvarado Rivera, who is the Minister of Agriculture and Livestock from Costa Rica. He is sending this message in Spanish. We do have some English subtitles, but I'll turn it over to the message now.
Miembros del Foro Empresarial de Políticas y Ciencias sobre el Medio Ambiente, estimados participantes, señores y señoras. Como Ministro de Agricultura y Ganadería, con base en la experiencia de Costa Rica, quisiera compartir con ustedes 3 reflexiones fundamentales en el marco del panel sobre sistemas alimentarios positivos con la naturaleza. La primera se refiere a la participación de la ciencia en la generación de soluciones aplicables al contexto de los sistemas alimentarios en cada país. Es necesario fortalecer la investigación y el desarrollo de opciones que favorezcan la eficiencia en los sistemas alimentarios, producir más con menos recursos naturales y consumir generando el menor impacto ambiental. Proveer el consumo de dietas saludables basadas en la diversidad de alimentos y la cultura de los pueblos, buscando el máximo aprovechamiento de la producción de alimentos y minimizar las pérdidas y desperdicios. La segunda es referida a la cooperación y alianza de esfuerzos bajo una visión que prioriza el beneficio común. En el contexto nacional, la articulación de esfuerzos entre el Ministerio de Agricultura, Salud, Ambiente, Educación, Ciencia y Tecnología es una poderosa herramienta para potenciar el rol del sector público en favor del desarrollo de sistemas productivos saludables para las personas y los recursos naturales. También son importantes las alianzas público-privadas, los esfuerzos en los que Costa Rica ha avanzado para reducir las emisiones no sería posible sin la participación de ambos sectores. En tercer lugar, se encuentra el desarrollo de economías locales que fortalezcan ecosistemas socioeconómicos en los que la proximidad entre los actores participantes potencian el bien común, economías donde la comunidad valoriza los servicios de los ecosistemas y comprende la importancia de la salud de los recursos naturales para su propia salud, individual y colectiva. Desarrollo de mercados locales en los que se promueve el consumo de alimentos frescos y de temporada. Ofrecen experiencias gastronómicas ricas en diversidad de alimentos producidos en sistemas eficientes basados en el uso de los recursos naturales disponibles localmente. Los desafíos que enfrenta globalmente requieren la solución integral que favorezcan el bienestar común, la recuperación de los recursos naturales y su capacidad para generar diversos ecosistemas para las presentes y futuras generaciones. Gracias.
Excellent. Thank you very much to the Minister from Costa Rica for sharing those very interesting insights. Let's talk a little bit more about food waste now. And to do this, I'd like to introduce Dr. Marcus Gover, who is the CEO at Waste and Resources Action Program, or WRAP. He is also building an index on food waste that Martina alluded to earlier in our conversation. So Marcus, maybe I'll pose a question which is simple but pretty critical to you. Is reducing food loss and food waste enough to deliver a net zero nature positive food system? We're sort of tying this back to what Martina mentioned in terms of the conversations on food waste and climate, and also to our first session on nature positive food systems. So is it going to be enough to deliver a net zero nature positive food system?
Thank you. And it's an honor to follow on from Martina and also from the Minister and their wise words. But we have to fix the food system. We won't fix climate change or stop biodiversity loss if we don't. And as others have said, the impact on our planet of producing food is staggering. Around 70% of the world's fresh water is used for agriculture. 30% of our total greenhouse gas emissions are down to food production. And around 80% of biodiversity loss is caused by food production. So really, the way we produce our food is the mother of sustainability issues. We have a lot of work to do if we were to deliver a net zero nature positive food system. But food loss and waste is a critical part of this. We throw away a third of the food that's produced. That's a third of the water, a third of the energy, a third of the time that went into it, that's all wasted. And a third of that biodiversity that was lost for nothing. In terms of the impact of that, we're talking about an area the size of China to grow the food that's thrown away. And we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions associated with food loss and waste that, if it was a country, would be greater than any other country on the planet apart from the US and China. So, and we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions much greater than those of global aviation. So we won't reach net zero, we won't limit global warming to 1.5 degrees if we don't tackle food loss and waste. The food loss and waste that happens right through the supply chain, from the farm to the fork. But while a lot of it is in the supply chain, much arises in people's kitchens around the world. And as I said at the Champions 12.3 meeting last year, our research is suggesting that tackling global food waste in the home is both our biggest challenge and our greatest opportunity. Yet most of us don't realise we waste food or appreciate the size of the problem. Recognising where the problem rises and quantifying the size of the problem to target, measure, act are the first steps to solving it. And that's why the Food Waste Index report being published by UNEP with our help in March is so important, because it provides new estimates of the scale of the problem globally, and it shows us how to measure it. And we can only win this food waste fight by doing that, and by working together across businesses, across sectors, across borders. No business, no organisation, no government can afford to go alone. Collaboration is at the heart of WRAP's voluntary agreement public-private partnership model, bringing together businesses, governments to drive system change. And as was said earlier, system change is critical here. Having proven that model in the UK through the Courtauld Commitment, we're now adapting it to deliver results around the world. And we're looking forward to launching El Pacto por la Comida in Mexico with BAMEX next month. And we're also supporting programs in Australia, South Africa, the Netherlands, the USA, Germany, and Indonesia. But we need to make it easy for citizens to reduce food waste. That will be critical. We will not achieve Sustainable Development Goal 12, Target 3 if we do not tackle food waste in the home all around the world. Our Love Food, Hate Waste campaign has delivered dividends in the UK, where we reduced edible food waste in the home by over 30%. And that brings with it very impressive reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. In the UK, equivalent to taking 2.4 million cars off the road. And that's around the same number of new cars that are put on the road each year. So it's a massive change. But we desperately need more investment in measures to tackle food waste in the home globally if we're going to do this. So I'm calling on governments, international organisations, trusts and foundations to prioritise the funding of tackling food waste in the home. If we don't do that, we will not tackle climate change. That forgotten third that never gets to feed people will make a big impact. But will we get to a net zero nature positive food system with that alone? It's not enough. No, we have to do more. We also need a huge shift to implementing the nature-based solutions that we've been talking about in agriculture, building diversity, biodiversity, capturing water and managing the soils to trap rather than release carbon, as well as healthier, more sustainable diets. We must commit to going further and faster. We have to scale up our ambition and our actions. WRAP is absolutely committed to this. It's the heart of our plan for a sustainable planet that we published recently, and you can find that on our website. It's also a commitment behind the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's Earthshot Prize, the world's biggest ever environmental prize, which WRAP is proud to be a partner of. If we all commit to this, if we all work together, I believe we can create a net zero nature positive food system. And reducing food loss and waste is a critical first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I think it's great to hear how you're creating the index and the data to be able to really, I guess, hold countries, policymakers, civil society, and private organizations accountable to some extent. We can only manage what we're able to collect, what we're able to measure. And so I think that is a critical first step, and really also thank you for driving the message of collaboration in solving this issue together. So appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for highlighting the importance of food waste in 2021.
Thank you. I'm honored to be part of this. Thank you.
All right, let's, in the spirit of what Marcus mentioned around, thinking about collaboration and examining the different stakeholders that are involved, I'd like to dive a little deeper on the role of the private sector here. So we have with us Christina Bauer-Plank, who is the Global Vice President Hellmann's at Unilever. So Christina, welcome to this conversation. Very happy to have you here. From your perspective, what is the role of large organizations like Unilever, or quite frankly, more generally, what is the role of the private sector to support sustainable consumption and production today?
Thank you very much, Pratima. Really appreciate the invitation to speak on this important topic today. As we have heard, food waste is a growing humanitarian and environmental crisis, and stopping food loss and waste across the food chain is essential to transforming to a more sustainable food system. And the private sector, including the food industry, has a critical role to play. As one of the biggest food manufacturers, we want to play our part. Within our future food strategy, Unilever announced its commitment to halve food waste across its global operations from factory to shelf already by 2025, which is 5 years earlier than the Champions 12.3 goal, which leads to 2030, to which we had signed up earlier. Further to halving food waste in our direct operations, we also have set out the following focus areas for ourselves across the chain. We want to enroll key supply partners to accelerate the reduction of food loss and waste in their operations. We will help our food service customers to tackle food waste in the HoReCa sector through prevention and redistribution. And through our brands, we will help consumers to waste less food at home. Through this set of actions, we aim to drive a bigger impact on food waste across the chain, importantly starting with getting our own house in order. And in our manufacturing and operations, we experience that the disciplined application of the Target Measure Act approach that has already been mentioned a couple of times from Champions 12.3 can make a real difference. It helps us measure and understand precisely where food waste occurs using an externally recognized standard. And based on this understanding, we then can put specific goals and plans in place against the areas that matter most. Creating data transparency and comparability through robust measurement, tracking, and public reporting is critical to drive real progress, as food waste is often unseen and undervalued. We also realized the need to go beyond the numbers and support a shift in mindset and culture in our organization. We need our people to look at food waste with different eyes, to see the lost potential and also feel the moral and environmental issue that goes with it. That is why we have started a movement in our company where we call upon all our employees to become food waste warriors. But let me now move to the issue of household food waste. It has been already mentioned a couple of times. 40% of global food waste happens in the home, which makes domestic food waste the single biggest contributor across the whole chain. So just to picture this, like 1 in 4 bags of grocery shopping ends up in the bin broadly. And that really needs to be addressed urgently. So let's talk about consumers and their behavior. It is important for us to realize that no consumer ever sets out to throw good food away. People have good intentions, but then life gets in the way. And food waste happens as an outcome of a whole chain of everyday behaviors, from meal planning, shopping, storing, to preparing and consuming food. Consumers need help. So we need concerted action in the following areas. Firstly, we need to raise awareness of the issue, as people do not realize the extent and impact of food waste nor their individual role in it. Moreover, people need education, inspiration, and simple practical solutions that help them to shop better, store better, and use their food better. And all of this will lead to reduced food waste in the home. And here is where companies and brands can help by supporting people to become better food managers. Take our Hellmann's brand as an example. Hellmann's is on a mission to inspire and enable 100 million people every year to become more resourceful with their food so that they waste less. Only 2 weeks ago, during the US Super Bowl, Hellmann's raised awareness around food waste with its Super Bowl commercial, "Make Taste, Not Waste." Another thing Hellmann's is doing is to inspire people to turn their leftovers into tasty meals through campaigns like Fridge Blindness, which we have been running in Brazil and many other countries. And we are also investing right now into developing structural behavior change programs, where we are partnering with leading behavioral psychologists and other experts in the field to understand the triggers and barriers for household food waste and what interventions can positively impact behavior. So in closing, I want to say that nobody can do this alone. We need a collective effort from retailers, manufacturers and their brands, NGOs, governments and campaigners to achieve lasting behavior change. So we call for a consumer movement on food waste to start now for better shopping, better storage and better usage of food. And for the industry, the whole private sector and beyond, we believe, based on our own experience, that the Champions 12.3 commitment and its Target Measure Act approach can make a major difference in tackling food loss and waste. Therefore, we call for its broad adoption across sectors and geographies. We are happy to play our part, but call upon the whole private sector and all of you to ensure that we reach a tipping point for food loss and waste. And the upcoming events of this year, like the UN Food Systems Summit and COP26, are of course a great opportunity to galvanize action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, for highlighting the importance of the private sector, large organizations with your reach, and also, I guess, really change begins at home. So having food waste managers, even employees within your company can be quite important, because everyone takes that away with them, whether it's creating awareness in the household level, amongst communities, educating, inspiring, and really delivering practical solutions. So thank you very much for sharing what the company has been doing. All right, let's move on now and hear our next message from Maria Carolina Duran, who is the Secretary of Economic Development for the city of Bogota in Colombia.
Thank you, UN Environmental Program, for inviting me to be part of this event. I am Carolina Duran, Secretary for Economic Development for the City of Bogota. It is important for us to make visible the work that the City of Bogota is doing regarding prevention and reduction of food waste. I am grateful to be on this panel on sustainable consumption and urban food waste. It's a big problem for us in the city and in Colombia. Environmentally, socially, and economically expensive for all the population. Almost 30% of the food produced yearly in Bogota, in Colombia, is wasted. That is 10 million tons per year. That will be enough to feed the entire city of Bogota during 1 year as well. That it means that 1/3 of every ounce or ton produced in Bogota is wasted and ends up in the trash. So what have we done to address this issue in 2020 in the city of Bogota? First and foremost, we have designed a clear roadmap for policy actions that will be implemented throughout the next years to come. Secondly, we did a no waste, no food waste challenge through a hackathon with the IDB, where 84 initiatives participated from all around the world, and we chose 4 winners. Those winners are one platform that acts as a bridge between the demand and the supply chain of food in perfect condition. So we would reduce the waste between the different hands that handle the chain of supply on food for the city. Secondly, we awarded an organic animal food company that recycles dairy products, milk products. And as one of the third elected initiatives in this hackathon was a small enterprise called Carbochemistry that manufactures edible coating to extend the shelf life of the food and also the post-harvest food in shelves and in storage. That would improve the cycle of distribution for the city in about 30%. During 2021, we will work to scale up these initiatives, but mainly to see how we can implement them with all the stakeholders of the food supply chain of the city. The food supply chain of the city is based on not only the city of Bogota, but also the metropolitan city of Bogota, its region. We depend on 70% of the food that comes from outside the city, as we don't rely on our own food produced within the city. That's why supply chain is one of the most important aspects to control waste in our food supply. Given that the supply chain for our food is so important and we work with the region, we are making a call for proposal to those community-led and based initiatives that reduce waste, recover and transform food. These initiatives, together with those that we chose last year, will be scaled up throughout the city, and hopefully we will be a case study for the country. So what is coming up next? And I think this is a perfect scenario to announce that during 2021, we are partnering with UN Environmental Program to develop a data, behavior, digital technology, a scheme, strategy to prevent and reduce food waste in Bogota. This project will offer public policy measurement and recommendations. We will aim into prevention, reduction, and measurement so we can inform about international good practices and to action that analysis into public policy initiatives. We will strengthen the capacities of the base of our national local actors, regional actors. We will perform a baseline estimate, which we don't have right now, and that will help us look into the household food waste. We will sensitize customers about the environmental impact of losing and wasting food. And obviously, we will improve the capacities of the local entrepreneurships and the local entrepreneurs that deploy green technologies, including digital solutions aimed at preventing and reducing food waste and potential impact in modifying consumption behaviors. Another exciting program coming our way is a strategy aimed to reduce food waste in public marketplaces. We have 18 marketplaces in the city of Bogota which are public, and we need to work with them to transform the food waste in the markets into fertilizer for crops. That will be part of this circular economy strategy that will definitely close the cycle between what comes into the city and what is brought back to the land in the regions. And it will allow us also to take a greater look into our urban food system. Public procurement is one of those topics that we need to address in order to be able to purchase local goods through the public system, but also through the households. How are we going to be able to purchase and contribute to the economy of the farmers who are the ones who produce and feed the city? That's one of the strategies that we'll be aiming into 2021. So thank you very much once again for inviting us to participate at this such a high level panel. And please know that the city of Bogota is committed to reducing food waste and eager to partner with you and to do public and private partnerships with actors across the globe in order to address this topic that is concern for humanity.
Thank you very much to Carolina Duran, who is who's representing the city of Bogota. It's always nice to see how some of these examples of best practice around, looking at technology at the center of different solutions, managing waste through community-based partnerships, and of course, a lot of data-driven insights, how all of that translates into case studies and best practices for different cities. So thank you very much for sharing your experience. All right, let's move on to the next topic of discussion in this panel for us, which is also linked, of course, to sustainability, but more on sustainable diets. We did talk about plant-based diets, sustainable diets in a bit across our different sections, but I want to turn it over to Shirley Liu, who is the Managing Director for Asia at ProVeg International, to give us some more insights on this topic. Shirley, why is there an urgency right now for the world to transition to more plant-based diets?
Thank you. Thank you, Fatima. Honor and pleasure to be here. Thanks for the organizer for having me. My name is Shirley Liu, Managing Director for Asia of ProVeg International. Allow me to briefly introduce ProVeg International. ProVeg is a nonprofit organization for food awareness and plant-based and cellular innovation. Our mission is to replace conventional animal consumption by 50% by 2040 with plant-based and cellular alternatives. ProVeg is accredited by UNEP and also has received the UN's Momentum for Change Award. So why shifting the diet pattern to be plant-rich or plant-forward? Our choice of food is a solution to many of the world's most urgent problems. I'm very excited to hear former speakers, Martina, Philip, and also James, mentioning about the urgency of diet behavior change. Plant-based or plant-rich diet has multiple benefits. It's good for health, good for environment, good for animals, and it's delicious. I'd like to especially highlight on the environmental impact. Okay. According to research, it was also cited by a professor earlier, that the food system contribute to 30% of the greenhouse gas emission. Among the 30%, over 50% is from animal agriculture. So total about over 16% of the greenhouse gas emission is from animal agriculture. However, animal agriculture only account for about 35% of the human calorie intake. And in terms of land use, animal agriculture consumes over 80% of the farmland use. It also results in a huge water footprint and also water pollution. Globally, it uses up 20% of the fresh water. Okay, thank you for putting on the slide. I can also talk it through. Yeah. A few speakers also talked about the food waste. In addition to the waste in production, in supply, and also in consumption, in retail, the choice of our food, our diet pattern could also contribute to food waste. According to calculations by UNEP, the calories that are lost by feeding grain to animals instead of using the grain directly feed humans could actually feed 3.5 billion more people. So if in net, animal agriculture is far more natural resource intensive than plant-based products. I give you one more example that it would take 12.5 kg of plant-based protein to produce 1 kg animal protein, which is also illustrates that the resource inefficiency in animal agriculture. So what PROVAC is doing to support, facilitate, and accelerate the diet pattern change, PROVAC established the first plant-based and cellular-based incubator in Europe. It's in Berlin, and the incubator is open to startups from Germany, Europe, and also from the world. In addition to the incubator, PROVAC is part of EU's 10 million euro project on smart protein. In the project, we brought together over 30 industry and also academia partners to develop the next generation plant-based products. We also run a panel of over 22,000 testers to help fine-tune, strengthen, and improve plant-based products. PROVAC also launched the New Food Conference, which features plant-based innovation, technology breakthrough. And this year, we are going to launch the first online New Food Invest conference that bring together plant-based and cellular-based entrepreneurs and investors and also venture capitalists to help accelerate the innovation. In major food shows like Food Ingredient Europe and Food Ingredient Asia, we also share our research on plant-based trends, consumer trends, and also on the best practice of plant-based innovation successes. In Asia, we continue focusing on accelerating the plant-based innovation. Last year, in 2020, during the COVID, we launched the first campus plant-based innovation challenge, which is also the first in the world. It's a multi-category. Okay. It's a multi-category innovation challenge, which includes a challenge in ingredient innovation, application innovation, and also advocacy innovation. It brought together 10 leading food organizations and involved over 22,000 Chinese university students in selecting and also developing the plant-based food concepts. Continue the success in China. This year, we are launching the Plant-Based Innovation Challenge in Southeast Asia. We just launched last month, and the idea submission will be due in mid-March. In this campaign, we have involved leading international food companies, including Unilever, Nestle, and also the largest regional poultry supplier, and local plant-based food startups. Bring them together with university students from 22 universities across the 10 ASEAN countries. So we think that this the campaign in Asia, we look forward to receive many more creative ideas from the youth in Asia. So to answer Pratima's question, is it urgent for the diet behavior shift to plant-based, plant-forward, or plant-rich? The answer is absolutely. By 2050, the forecast is global population will reach 10 billion people. If we continue the current consumption pattern, this means it will require 56% more animal protein. So a shift in our diet pattern is must and also urgent. And again, I echo to the speakers earlier that we can't do this alone, and we need an ecosystem and also collaboration with international organizations like UN, local government, food and beverage organizations, and also other NGOs. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I think it's important for you to highlight in making the case as well around the inefficiency in our diets currently, and for really demonstrating the urgent need for change. So appreciate you taking the time and looking forward to keeping this conversation going. All right. On the next topic on the agenda, it's sort of linked to sustainable diets, but we're also kind of taking a deeper look at one of the topics that we hit in passing earlier, but also that's hugely relevant and important to the conversation on sustainable ag, on sustainable diets, and that's urban farming. I wanted to talk a little bit about the policy environment that's required to support this urgent task of shifting dietary patterns, sustainable diets, and of course, sustainable agriculture. So with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Wilson Marino, who is the director of the Economic Promotion Agency in Quito, the city of Quito in Ecuador. Welcome, Wilson. I want to pose a question to you on how policy action can create the right conditions for sustainable urban farming.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be part of this event. Climate change and food provision are arguably the two most pressing issues in an increasing urbanized world, particularly in the global south. Quito Municipality Project Participatory Urban Agriculture, Agrupar, aims to tackle both by supporting urban gardens in public and private lands with community participation for food security and sovereignty, environment management, employment and income improvement, social inclusion, sustainability and resilience. Urban and peri-urban agriculture is a type of green infrastructure in cities, can be seen as a multifunctional nature-based solution to face climate change, while also address food scarcities and accessibility, especially in formally developed urban areas of Latin America. Two important social challenges of our times, UPA can contribute to at least 10 societal challenges, including climate change, food, biodiversity, and ecosystem service, among others. Regarding to climate change, UPA can contribute to water regulation, improve air circulation and cooling, offer microclimates, and in combination with other green and blue infrastructures, it can help to mitigate urban heat island effects. At the same time, UPA can help to mitigate food insecurity and contribute to poverty reduction and health strategies for cities. UPA and nature-based solutions in general are not something additional for cities and should be integrated in a planning of them. The main impact of Agrupar have been the improvement and availability of health food for poor urbanity, improvement of economic opportunities for urban farmers, environmental benefits, and significant challenge in consumers' behavior by creating more than 4,400 gardens, currently 2,100 active gardens, covering 63 hectares of the city. The development of an urban agriculture policy offers a holistic social approach that can be respond to the needs of different groups of the population. For instance, college children to learn about the origin of food, nutritional diversity, and the problem of food waste. Adults with disability giving a feeling of usefulness and integration in society. Women lead a household by allowing them work at home while taking care of their children, and even migrants and refugees can be integrated into society through farming and supporting when they leave their roots. 85% of urban and peri-urban farmers of Quito are women. Dealing with these effects of COVID-19 crisis on Quito food systems require both short-term and sustainable long-term actions. There is a need to consider the role urban agriculture can play in community development and is in struggling socioeconomic cohesion through proximity-based initiatives, environmental sustainability, and responsible consumption. Community cooperation, solidarity, and social interaction are also need and rethink an approach to municipal planning that favor physical distance or low contact will have to be developed. There is a need for more versatility systems that have greater capacity to adapt to a new global and local circumstance. The different scale of the agri-food systems, neighborhoods, district, municipality, or metropolitan, national, or global, each have their own dynamic actors, relationships, problems, and solutions that must be addressed in a specific way, even though they are connections between them. In accordance with the proposal in the resilience strategy of Quito food systems, the city urban, peri-urban gardens have offered solutions to the food providing problems caused by COVID-19 at various scales, but all emphasize health and diversity food and producing families. Surplus produce has been sold by 3 channels: occasional sales, weekly sales of baskets, sales of fixing quality, and selection of produce via collaborating supply chain. Quito urban gardens have been production capacity 1.35 million kilograms of healthy food each year, of which 57% is consumed by producers and their families, and 43% sold by various short supply chains. Each week, about 11 tons of fresh and healthy food are destined for the city's most vulnerable neighborhoods. During the crisis, vulnerable people face the loss of household income that will normally be spent on food. The issues required serious, rapid attention for many others who lives in the food deserts or food swaps, who have mobility issues and or limit time accessing supermarkets, and also become a major concern. Even for those with sufficient economy resources, food has been a priority. As part of COVID-19 response, urban agriculture mitigates the effect of food security, people, livelihood. This is what we have done here in the city of Quito. Different dimensions have been looked to take action, and we're happy to share what we have done here in Quito to the rest of the world, and we hope we can work together and try to have bigger impact in the different challenges that we have to face in the coming years.
Thank you very much, Wilson. Indeed, always wonderful to hear your experience on how you're tackling this issue, and also being able to share it with others to see what are some of those best practices and learnings that we can apply across different cities. Speaking of, let's move from Latin America to Africa. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Esau Galukande, who is the Director of Gender and Community Service in the city of Kampala in Uganda. Obviously, Wilson also mentioned the role of gender in urban farming and sustainable farming as well. But maybe I'll pose a slightly different question to you, Dr. Galukande. We could talk about gender as well, but how can general policy action create the right conditions for sustainable urban farming in Uganda, based on your experience?
Okay, thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon or good morning to all the listeners wherever they are. It's indeed good for us to be here and recognize our work in promoting urban farming. How can policy be sustainable? One of the challenges that the city grappled with for a long time was, is urban farming legal or not legal? People didn't know if by practicing it they were infringing on the city rules. So they lived in fear, and it was done in hiding. So we now have a policy, an ordinance that actually does not stop it, but regulates how you can do it, where you can do it, and how you can be registered. And then you can be identified and given support. So in a way, it can give the environment and the restrictions of where somebody can practice.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I think recognizing it as an industry is obviously the first step, and then being able to talk through some of those practices. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about once now that you've legalized it and it's recognized, what are some of those policies that you're setting in place to make it much more mainstream, if that is the case?
Okay, just like I said, it did exist, but people are not so sure if it was allowed by the city authorities. So we have about 80,000 households involved in it. We have an ordinance, and we now have 21 extension workers within the city. Kampala is divided into 5 administrative divisions. And in each of those, we have somebody responsible for the mainstream agriculture, the cropping. Then there are those to do with fisheries. Then there are those to do with agribusiness. Those are the ones to do with value addition and any business startups that need training for farmers. Then we've also set up a model farm demonstration center. We call the Chanja Agricultural Resource Center. It's a center where we exhibit different enterprises that somebody can carry out in small spaces. And it's really for somebody to come and pick what they can replicate. It's also a center where we provide seedlings, provide some of the manure which have been broken down from the waste in the markets. And it's also a center where we provide services. There's some pigs in the city, and we provide efficient insemination services from that center. Then we also set up model farms. In each of the 5 divisions, we have 2 farmers, 2 units where we are calling them model farms. We've supported them, and that's where the training takes place. There are centers where people in those divisions can easily go and get backup support. So in a way, we are able to reach around 10,000 visitors coming to our center in Chanja. And the model farms are each attached to 50 farmers. So we're talking about 50 times, about 120 farmers that are constantly getting information. And each one of them also can influence other farmers.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Galkande, for sharing the experience. I think the idea of having the model farms, and then, as you mentioned, 125 farmers is quite a number that's sort of it's a large-scale pilot project, I guess. So thank you very much for sharing your experience, and looking forward to speaking again, coming back to this in a little bit. I'd like to now quickly turn over from policymakers. We heard from Dr. Galkande in Uganda. We heard from Wilson Marino in Ecuador. I'd like to turn it over to Asia and ask one of our speakers, Ullas Samrat, who is the co-founder of Triton Foodworks. He's an entrepreneur. So from your perspective, from an entrepreneur's perspective, Mr. Samrat, what policy action is required to encourage innovation and entrepreneurial urban farming?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the question. So very briefly, I'll just try to set a little context, and I know I'm allowed only 5 minutes. I'll try and get it done in 3. So I'm a co-founder at Triton Foodworks, and what we do is that we are a new age, we call ourselves a new age food production and distribution startup, and we're solving for inefficiencies in the fresh food produce space. And we basically, what we do is we design and deploy integrated systems to grow and sell number one, tasty and then nutritious produce on a year-round basis, agnostic of location and weather. And our focus right now is to grow premium quality non-GMO produce closer to consumption centers that reduces food miles and improves food security. And we are cognizant that we alone and a lot of other players like us globally, the focus right now is only on the top of the pyramid, which doesn't really actually solve on the ground the food security and nutrition for all problem which is the guiding principle primarily for people like us around the world. And it is only with more R&D backing in form of policy support from policymakers across the globe, and not just local support, but it has to be a global endeavor, that we can bring about some systemic change. When we're talking about feeding 10 billion people a nutritious diet and a tasty diet, a diet that is not sort of like an afterthought, and not like a hand-me-down sort of an approach. It can only be done through policy support that we're a very small team. We're a team of three friends who've been working at solving this problem for the last 5 years now. And if we, with no formal training in agriculture, can manage to save more than 2 billion liters of water since we started, we can just imagine what positive impact we can have on a global scale if we have more policy impacts, just like the ones that the speakers have been talking about in, say, Uganda or in Southern America and places where we actually need more policy approach. And research and development is the most critical part of this, so that we can solve for tomorrow's problems today is essentially what we ask for as in terms of support.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alas. That's critical. We have to solve for tomorrow's problems. It's important for us to not play catch up on this. So thank you very much for sharing your perspective as an entrepreneur. We've come to the end of this session, a very interesting and critically important one on food waste in urban farming. And I know that we've got some very engaged members in the audience asking questions. So maybe I'll sift through the questions and ask one. One of them is, what are some success stories to drive behavioral change in consumers? I'm guessing this is with regards to food waste. So Marcus, maybe I'll ask you to comment in about a minute. Do we have any success stories to drive behavioral change in consumers? All right. I do believe that Marcus is unable to hear us. Martina or anyone else on the food waste panel, would you have any success stories to share on behavioral change in consumers? I'm afraid we're having some technical difficulties. Just give us a few minutes to resolve these. All right. I believe we have another question. I can see Shirley on the call. So Shirley, this is a question for you. Are traditional meat and dairy companies starting to make the transition to plant-based and cellular alternatives? Are we seeing that now?
Yes, yeah. In fact, hi, okay. Thanks for the question. Good question. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Right, yes. No, the major meat producer, traditional meat producer like Tyson, Purdue, Maple Leaves, all have their plant-based meat product line. In fact, I think Memphis Meat, I think it's invested by Cario. Again, a major meat supplier, also invested in cellular meat development. In Asia, we see the same trend. I mentioned about the plant-based food challenge we are launching in Southeast Asia. And one of the partaking company is CPF. For those who are in Asia, know CP very well. It's one of the leading food company in Asia. It's in Thailand, but their presence is across Asia. They're partaking in the plant-based food innovation challenge. They're starting developing a plant-based product line, in convenience food. So we do see that conventional food and beverage companies get into the plant-based development. And with their sales and marketing and distribution resources, I think they're going to impact many more consumers. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I do hope that that's true. As this becomes more and more mainstream, we will see it impacting more consumers and changing dietary patterns as well. So thank you very much for sharing those insights. All right. Thank you to everyone in the audience for your questions. We're now entering the last session on this panel. It's been more than 2 hours, and so time does fly when you're having a really interesting and insightful conversation. Our last topic of discussion today is on digital farming. So obviously a nice segue from sustainability, diets, urban farming to digital. Obviously technology, as we know, we've alluded to this throughout our sessions, is really at the heart of our food system today. There are huge advances in exponential technologies that are transforming the way that we live and the way that we work. And of course, farming is no exception to this. In the next few minutes or in the next few discussions, we'll talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence is already changing farming around the world. To do this, our first speaker today is Professor Jean-Marie Dembele from the Gaston University in St. Louis, Senegal. Thank you for being with us today, Professor Dembele. I'd like to get us started with something broad. Can you maybe describe for us what digital farming is? And following that, I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts and learn about your experience from the work that's done in Senegal. So I'll turn the floor to you for the next 5 minutes to take us through what digital farming is and your experience in Senegal.
Thank you very much for the moderation. So my name is Jean-Marie Dembele, and I am an associate professor of computer science in Gaston University in St. Louis, Senegal, West Africa. So I am also the actual dean of the Applied Science and Technology faculty in the same university. So in my research, I work on agent-based modeling and simulation of dynamical system, and I recently got interested in and involved in machine learning. So you can understand that I am not specialized in farming. I am a computer scientist who just wants to use recent developments in artificial intelligence for farming. Well, the content of our speech is IoT, Internet of Things, and machine learning, and how we can apply them in waste, waters, recycling, and farming. In this session, nature positive food systems for a healthy planet and healthy people, it was important for us to put emphasis on water reuse, since water might be a crucial resource to sustain food systems in the future. Indeed, in 2030, water supplies are predicted to be shorted of 39% of demand. It is also important to state that we will not focus on fertigation. Let me explain. You know, fertigation is a technique developed in Israel the roots of, and many students like sensors or software sensors. You know, sensors are just some dispositives that can take some measurements to improve fertigation. From this data, they can optimize the amount of water and fertilizer for sustainable agriculture. What we plan to do is to focus on wastewaters recycling, especially from constructed wetlands like planted soil filters, since 80% of our wastewaters or more flows back to nature untreated. Planted filters consist of a mix of sand and gravel structure planted with wetland plants like, let's say, like reeds. In planted filters, and biology processes, and at the exit, the treated water can be used for irrigation or fertigation. This is where we stand, water supply before the actual farming. So in Gaston University, we obtained since January 2019 a prototype of experimentation planted soil filters with a project GERUID led by colleagues in Geography Department and the Foundation Solidarity of the University of Barcelona in Spain. We also got associated with a team of colleagues involved in Smart Clean Garden project, which is led by DJ Orange in ERB. Some details can be found online at smartcleangarden.org. So our ongoing work is to use machine learning and IoT inside the planted filter to optimize the size and the output of our planted filter in order to provide the experimental farm, which is near the planted filter in the university, with treated water for there are some like the chemical demand, the biochemical oxygen demand, biodiversity, pathogens, bacteria, and so on. And on top of all of that, you have also data on climate, like temperature, humidity, wind, and data inside the filter itself, like temperature, humidity, and pH redox, and so on. So this data can be followed with sensors. All this data should now be crossed with the filter parameters like the debit at the outside, size and types of gravel and soils, in order to do some regression and classification with machine learning to optimize the size of the filter and also reduce the cost. So all we are doing here is trying to optimize the size of our filter and reduce the cost. So the ideal capacity we would like to reach is less than 0.2 square meter per 1% wastewaters at a minimal cost. So do not forget, the main purpose of all of this is to make available the filter technology, not only to farmers, but also to simple users to treat their wastewaters. At this day, we are working outside the filter with other data to train our model in order to we are also maps and the number of sensor per square meter, and we are looking forward at the end of the pandemic to get actual measurement from our filters and validate our model. So this is an ongoing research, and what we expect from this meeting is expertise from farmers on what kind of treated water they need in correlation to the kind of crops they grow, for example. From the policymaker, we expect encouragement to convince our authority in filter is used, and from funders, we are also interested in any support to follow our work. We would like to duplicate the filters, buy more sensor, get weights and material for the training algorithm, for training students, and also the users. We hope that such a project, which is answering to water supplies need in farming, such a project can generate works for unemployed people and make autonomous houses in wastewater recycling rather than using a lost septic tank. So basically, to be concise, what we are doing here is using IoT and artificial intelligence in wastewater recycling before providing the water to the what we can call.
Professor Jean-Marie, I think we're having trouble with your bandwidth.
Okay.
If you could maybe switch off your video, I think you could conclude without the video. I think that might be easier.
Okay, thank you. I don't know how much time, I don't know. Okay, it looks like, yes, my internet is. Are you getting me?
We can hear you now, yeah. It would be great for you to just sort of conclude without the video. I think it's working better this way.
Okay, so what I was saying is that our ongoing research is what we are doing, and what we expect here from this meeting to finish is some expertise for the farmer on what kind of treated water they need in correlation to the kind of crops they grow. Also from policymakers, we would like them also to help us to convince our authorities in order to disseminate this technology that can be used in houses and also that can be used for farmers. Thank you very much. I think that I have reached my time.
Thank you very much, Professor. No problem at all. Completely understand. It's the COVID age we live in. Bandwidth issues are normal. Thank you for sharing that very inspiring example, and also how you're kind of working with other stakeholders, getting farmers involved, and really utilizing advanced technologies effectively to solve the world food systems issues. So thank you for sharing that. Moving on to our last few speakers for today, I want to broaden the conversation a little bit from moving from Senegal to other countries or the stakeholders, and introduce our next speaker, Mr. Peter Rylander, who is a partner at IBM Global Business Services. Welcome, Peter. I have a two-part question for you. The first is, how is digital technology transforming sustainable farming? And in terms of applications, how can this be scaled up, particularly in the developing world, through actions both by policymakers and big tech?
Thank you, Pratima. So I also have with me Mr. Stormarken from Yara, and he will join me, and we will do this session together with him.
That sounds great. Maybe I'll just introduce your colleague as well then. Mr. Paul Oyston Stormarken, he is VP of Farm Ecosystems at Yara International, and over to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having us here. Highly appreciate this important topic. Paul, as we all know now, we are in the
Are we going to have our presentation? Are we going to have our presentation? Because we have prepared a presentation.
Sure, it's loading. I can see it just loading at this point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
can you
Paul,
go to the next page?
Can you hear me, Paul?
Yes.
Okay.
I can.
Yeah. So let's get started. We are into a crisis of a lifetime, as we know now, and failure to act could cause irreversible social and economic damage. In the light of this, Paul, how important is the cooperation between private corporation, government agencies, and others to reduce negative consequences of this crisis?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question for us to Yara and the way we are working. And we wanted to use the Yara's Action Africa as a case example for this presentation. Can we have one page further in the presentation? We have in the Action Africa worked very seamlessly with the World Food Programme and the governments in the East African countries where this action have taken place during more or less the whole of at least from Q2 in 2020. We have been in Africa for a long time, and I think the intersection between what we are doing with the knowledge we have and also the presence at the ground and the governments have been essential to what we have been able to obtain and being a long-term player in the African market, but also in the smallholder market in Southeast Asia and also in Latin America.
Thank you, Paul. So in addition to preventing permanent social and economic damage, how can this initiative Action Africa create a more resilient and sustainable food system?
I think what Action Africa have really proven is that you need alignment, because in a lot of these cases, without or with a pandemic situation, you see that a lot of value chains are broken. And to have aligned value chains between we as input players, the farmers, the government, and also the off-takers is essential. The developing markets where you see aligned and transparent value chain, you see a successful growth. And I mean, the Asian Green Revolution have been an example where the value chains have been significantly stronger. We are still struggling with that in Africa, and we hope to see as a continuation of Action Africa that we can build more aligned and transparent value chains.
Thank you. We will soon show a video on the initiative. But before that, just how important would you say that technology is to succeed with this initiative and make farming both more attractive for the farmer, but also create sustainability?
I think what we see is that, like I said, the transparency have been a very, very important thing, because we can use the technology to contact the farmer, telling him or her that they are going to be a part of this action. They can go to their local dealer. They can get a bag of fertilizer. That is everything done through a system where I will come a bit further into. But it's information. I mean, to keep people informed, be a part of the digital information system, but also be able to get knowledge, to access knowledge, because it's so difficult for our people on the ground to reach millions of farmers. It's very easy to meet a few, but to meet really the scale of farmers is very difficult. So digital is critical for that.
Thank you, Paul. Can we please have the video now? One step back. Yeah, there we are.
COVID-19 is a health crisis, but the secondary effect of COVID-19 is the potential of having a wider scale food crisis.
The situation is dire. If we don't take action now, we are going to pay for it big time.
The fertilizer donation addresses more than just food production.
So the Action Africa initiative is not about giving smallholders fish. It's actually about helping smallholders to know how to fish.
Kulikuwa na agronomist kutoka ya Ramilas ndio wakati alinipea mbolea akanisha jinsi ya kutumia.
We can change the narrative of food insecurity.
The coolest aspect about Action Africa has been the technology that the team has been able to put together.
A bag or two sounds a little, but it can change a farmer's life.
Awali kabla ya kutumia mbolea, mazao kwa heka tulikuwa tunavuna mahindi gunia 7, gunia 5. Lakini tunataraji baada ya kupata hizi mbolea za yara kwa wakati, tukavuna mahindi zaidi ya gunia 20, 25 mpaka 30.
Action Africa has created a new spirit. Working with the partners has proved that we can do the unthinkable. We would welcome key partners to join in. What we are doing through Action Africa is something that will touch the livelihoods of many, many people.
Yes, and this slide shows the whole platform that we built in order to enable Action Africa to go seamlessly. So we could be able to track the fertilizer from the key site in Mombasa and Dar es Salaam and to the farmer level. And we were sure that the one that was nominated to get the product was getting the product. And at the same time, more than 2 million farmers registered in a very, very short time and really got solid agronomic knowledge, at the same time getting the input that was necessary to keep the food system going in this particularly difficult year. I also want to highlight specifically the weather. So I think for me, Peter, when you look at the IBM and the Yara partnership in what we are doing, farm weather have been a great success. And the question to you from me is, what do IBM do to improve the importance of the hyperlocal weather forecast that can, and we know can mitigate the situation for the farmer driven by the climate change.
Yes, thank you. We can take the next slide, please. Yeah, so obviously weather is impacting all of us, businesses, organization, and actually all living things on this planet. And no one is immune for the weather. And of course, the environmental changes is impacting us through the weather quite heavily. And for a farmer, I mean, we have 600 million of them. I would say that the most important factors for those farmers, if I pick three, is weather, and weather. So it's really, really important, and weather impacts the decision they're taking. And a farmer in average take about 300 key decisions that impacts families and their lives per year. So you can imagine that weather is really important for farming. And what we have done is really to get accurate farmer weather forecast for the farm out to everybody on this planet. So we leverage the exponential technologies like cloud, artificial intelligence, IoT, and big data technologies to do a more accurate forecast, do it faster, more frequently updated, and also down to a resolution level that allows that the farmer get the forecast for his or her farm. And that is really helping them to mitigate and de-risk the farming business by actually knowing when things happening in the weather. And you can just imagine when you are taking the fertilizer to the field, if you have a lot of rain that afternoon, it's all wasted. So it's really important to have this knowledge and insight that impacts the farmer. And I think the farmer app, weather app, is a very good example on how we unite knowledge from Yara and IBM technology to make farming more attractive and also start making the food value chain more sustainable.
I think it is very important to realize that hyperlocal weather is the critical thing. Weather forecast, there are a lot of apps around about weather, but they become too general. The farm weather app is based on very hyperlocal, so even a small farmer with a small plot can localize and feel that this is a weather forecast for him or her, not a general one.
Yes. Okay, let's conclude our presentation.
So please continue. No, I guess I just have a follow-up question that's incredibly interesting. I think the hyperlocal weather app that you highlighted is so important and so powerful for farmers. As you're thinking about sort of introducing these technologies to farmers, what's the role that policymakers and big tech can play in scaling this up and really finding the economies of scale by kind of ensuring that it remains hyperlocal, but it's done at scale to reach the maximum number of people as possible?
This have been now into the market for less than a year, and I think the latest figures is close to 4 million or 3.5 million farmers in the markets we have gone, 7 markets, and we have also done this as a freemium because we believe this is the first, let's say, drive for the digital connectivity. And I think that when you talk about digital farming, digital connectivity is essential. And we know that the digital transformations comes very much driven by the mobile connectivities. And this is very much also from a Yara perspective, we work a lot with the telco companies in order to create a symposium that can benefit the farmer by getting the connectivity to as many as possible. And this is done in a way that is really suitable for that.
I just want to build upon that, and also, as we have heard throughout the day here, how important the whole food value chain is to produce food in a more sustainable way, this first mile of information from the farm field is essential to actually be able to produce food in a more sustainable way. So policymakers could really make a change by also making sure that at the end, that faces the interface to us as consumer, that they really demand to have this information throughout the value chain. That will help to drive sustainability.
I think it's also another aspect where I have 3.5, 4 years experience of living in East Africa myself, and I think that to have a policymakers also to more carefully look at the crop strategy. The weather can very quickly tell you what is really beneficial to produce where. And I think that we have some way to go there today, where maybe also the cooperation between the business and the governments could spend more time on discussing crop strategies for countries, because there are no reason for farmers to produce something that is not really yielding value because of, for example, weather conditions that is not favorable for that crop.
Excellent. Thank you very much, gentlemen, Paul and Peter, for this very interesting insight and quite frankly, a really good note to end on. It's forward-looking. It's something that is already in the market that we're kind of waiting to see how it really the execution of it and its impact on farmers. So a really optimistic note to end on. So thank you for taking the time and appreciate you sharing your insights with us. All right. We've come to the end in terms of our presentations, but I do want to open the floor for some interventions now. We'll turn it over to a speaker or two and for them to share their insights as well. So the first is Gabor Fujiski, who is a senior manager of global policy at the International Federation of Organic Agriculture in the movement of major groups, and he's a representative of the major groups farmers. So all yours, Gabor. I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Gabor Fujiski. I'm from Organics International. We are the global umbrella for organic farming. And here I'm representing the farmers major group and all the major groups in the UNEP process, actually. We very much appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion today. We farmers are looking at the upcoming Food Systems Summit as an opportunity, but also as a threat. We have seen and heard far too much talk and very little action when it comes to improving the livelihoods of those who ensure we have food on our tables. This discussion today did not decrease our concerns. We know very well that farmers are sometimes the best innovators within the whole food system. Even though farmers are all businessmen and entrepreneurs themselves, we didn't have any of them as a speaker in a discussion about policies, science, and business in food systems. We are concerned that climate action, nature action, and chemicals and pollution action misses desired emphasis on foundational principles of agroecology, food and seed sovereignty, security of land tenures, local food self-sufficiency rights, and protection of small and family farmers, including indigenous populations and women farmers, and genuine agrarian reforms. We were very happy to see some promising policy examples, like what is happening in Quito and in Bogota, as well as Kampala in Uganda. We would like to see a lot more of this and more participatory research and more involvement of farmers in policymaking. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, Gabor. I'll turn it over now to Berkehan Erkilik, who is the representative of the children and youth major groups.
Dear distinguished attendees, my name is Berkehan Erkilik and I'm a fourth-year medical student from Turkey. I'm exhilarated to be here representing the UNEP Major Group for Children and Youth in front of you, the change makers. Although we are advancing on technological and industrial grounds, we fail to acknowledge the repercussions of our actions of today. We are unconsciously leaving behind unfathomable marks on planetary health and naturally, human health. Currently, food systems contribute highly to biodiversity loss and the climate crisis. In the face of such calamity, we believe that change is only effective when everyone involved takes action, the governments, companies, NGOs, and civil society. I want to ask you, are we unaware of what is imminent, or are we choosing to turn a blind eye as a society? How much are you listening to by far the largest stakeholder that there is, the youth? I would like to address you all once again, not only as a representative of a youth organization, but the very subject of that dystopian future that we all fear is coming. Colleagues, the youth is present and will continue to be present in the climate action workforce. Will you choose to work with us? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Definitely something inspiring and something to look forward to work towards. Thank you for that, Barakan. Our last speaker today, our last intervention is from the Children and Youth Majors Group representative as well, Francine Beatriz Pradez. I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Pratima, for giving me the floor. Distinguished speakers and honorable delegates, greetings. I am Francine Pradez, a youth and nutrition advocate from the Philippines, and I am speaking on behalf of the major group Children and Youth, the UNEP. In 2018, the Global Nutrition Report declared adolescent nutrition, especially that of girls, as one of 3 issues that are in need of attention. As a vulnerable group, our constituency is troubled as their individual situations are further aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. They face food insecurity on top of malnutrition and, in worst cases, hunger. This is not to isolate the general population, but to state the truth. Malnutrition is an intergenerational cycle that starts during childhood. To break the cycle requires multilateral and intersectional approaches that do not speak for the problem, nor about those vulnerable to it, but consults directly to those experiencing it. It is on this note that we forward the following points of action. 1. Achievement of nature-positive food systems along with shifting to sustainable plant-based or plant-rich diets, and the promotion of zero-kilometer food, especially local and seasonal food. 2. Prioritization of nutrition and application of a gendered lens on health systems and response. And 3. Amplification of youth participation and representation globally. To end, we reaffirm our role in becoming partners for change and reiterate our support in ensuring that the health of the people and the planet we inhabit are given the proper attention it warrants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francine. Thank you for those comments and a good note to end on. While we can talk about this topic for hours and if not days, I do realize we've come to close to the end, and that's sort of all the time we have for our discussion today. I want to turn things over to Professor Mark Sutton for his concluding remarks and really thank our speakers for providing us some really important insights on a range of issues from incentives to a roadmap for actions, a systems-based approach, and collaboration. So as we think about what we're taking away from the session, I'll turn things over to Professor Mark to wrap us up for today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pratima. And thank you, everybody. This has been such an exciting session. I'd see such a range of inputs from everybody, high technology options, low technology options, a crazy world, this crazy world where on the one hand, we've got obesity in many parts of the world, and on the other hand, we've still got malnutrition. This is completely bonkers. We need to change, there's no question. What I love to see here is everybody coming together. We've got the United Nations, of course, the countries, we've had ministers on the call, business, big business, maybe the farmers need to be more present, but we've also seen the civil society and the youth present. In this, what I'm seeing is urgency. I think we've all agreed there's urgency. We've also seen openness. And I think what is wonderful about this openness is coming with this massive range of imaginative solutions, everybody coming from different directions. In this, then, let's add in an extra one. And I'll call it, let's say, less polarized. And I project back a few years, people with different visions. Sometimes, we get into big fights about what is our view of the solution. And if I think about this, let's say a fertilizer world or an organic world. But what I'm seeing now is that the dialogue is going beyond that with the respect for different views. Yes, different visions, of course, but that respect for different views. And it means that wherever you're coming from, there's a role for a solution. So if you're an organic farmer, what would you do? How to be profitable, how to be good for the environment. If you're a farmer using fertilizers or pesticides, how to do it better, how to have less pollution, less waste, more going to your system. So I see different visions, but I see us working together. I think this is really, really exciting. There are, of course, sensitive topics. We can't avoid that reality. We've talked today about nitrogen. We know that phosphorus is a hugely sensitive topic. That's got to be for another day. But I do see us all working together. And of course, this is the United Nations. That means the countries, but the United Nations working in the Science Policy Business Forum with business, with society. And let's ask some questions. What do countries do? Countries set policies, they set direction, they get voted in most countries. And of course, is it carrots? Is it sticks? Many want carrots, perhaps we're less welcome for tough regulation. But in this world of farming systems, people have said how much massive money is going in to subsidies, supporting agriculture, and therefore, how can that be changed to be using that existing resource better for people's well-being, for the rich, the poor, for everybody, and of course for the environment. So I think these are the challenges I see, that we've done a great preparation on the way to the Sustainable Food Summit, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this conversation continuing in the months ahead.
Thank you very much, Mark. I completely agree. We've laid some really good groundwork for the UN Food System Summit that's coming up. I also agree that we've talked a lot about the different perspective and the different challenges, but having that perspective, that information, that expertise from different areas also contributes to very different but critical solutions that can allow us to collaborate and really solve this crisis rather than make it and exacerbate it, make it even worse. I will highlight that this is known to be the decade of change. I think we're trying to achieve zero hunger in the next decade, achieve the SDG goal number 12, the responsible production and consumption. And to your point, really, what was highlighted in this is essentially everybody coming together, governments, policymakers, nonprofits, private sector players, driving urgency and taking decisive action as something that's we're all going to be keenly watching going forward. With that, I want to thank all of the speakers for taking the time to speak with us today and for sharing your incredibly valuable insights, solutions, perspective. It's hugely important for us to all come together and keep this conversation going. And thank you to the audience for your questions throughout the session. A reminder that the next and the final session of the third global session will begin at 5 p.m. Eastern Africa time, and that will focus on the future of multilateralism, exploring how different sectors can work together to harness new technologies and scientific advances to solve the global issues that are affecting our planet. So with that, a big thank you to all our speakers, audience, and thank you for being part of the third global session of the UN Science Policy Business Forum.